we've talked a lot about how there's been resets, about how a lot of our current system is very new. And one of the things you mentioned in the book, which was very interesting to me, especially since I just listened to the Trump Rogan interview where they talked about the Gilded Age and the prosperity of the 1800s. And so you say in the book that the era of free banking was the most prosperous in human history. Could you elaborate a little bit for people on that for me?
I mean, the crazy thing is that almost anything in this room, the core technologies were invented between 1850 and 1910, and then they were really only refined. and that's so stark because basically the US central bank was only put in place in 1913. So even though there's a real lag, you still saw even before 1913 that they were devaluating the dollar by preparing the central bank. Even that already can be seen if you look at the economic data from the US. Really, the US was the leader there because they were the freest country at the time, and they basically in the second half of the 19th century, after the Civil War, they abolished the central banks, and basically it was the spirit that nobody talks about today anymore. But there was really the spirit of, we don't want any politician to ever have the power to wage such a war again. So they dismantled the central bank. They destroyed a lot of agencies. They basically, the federal police was completely private. There were private detective agencies. Otherwise, there was only a statewide police. There was no FBI and stuff. And arguably, the FBI from the beginning was more corrupt than these agencies. And these agencies, when they got corrupt at the end of the 19th century, was mostly due to federal politics meddling in the process and basically banning many of them from doing their job. But all this, when you hear this, the Wild West, the headhunters, this was such a chaotic situation. I mean, obviously, it was a less developed time, so it was much easier to get away with crime, which the easier it is to get away with crime, the more crime happens. It's just the nature of the thing. But even so, it was arguably much more organized, and most people had much more freedoms and rights than they have to do today. You might argue, yeah, women's rights and stuff, but yes, women weren't allowed to vote, and there were many other negative things for women. But overall, these federal rights, what we were allowed to do federally, didn't actually really affect people's life that much, because basically if you lived somewhere out of the greater Washington area or the East Coast area, the federal government had almost zero influence on life. And this freedom, basically, with a hard money, where basically banks were competing with their gold certificates, and nobody would bail them out. So people actually had to think about, hey, will this bank keep my gold safe? Will they be robbed? Will they basically give out more certificates than they actually have gold and awards? All this led to a dramatic shift. It was like over 80% of people were living in extreme poverty before, and it was, I think, around 20% or even less after. So it was drastic shift, and so many technologies and so much wealth gained in just a time span of 60 years. Really, like the lifetime of the average lifetime of a person. And then basically this all really quickly reversed in 1913 when the income tax and the Federal Reserve were invented. And this all basically, Mises at the very early predicted that this would lead to 1929, eventually to the Great Depression. And the biggest marketing trick in the books is that basically there was a Great Depression already in 1921 in the US, which was caused by too big fractional reserve and other factors.
Really?
But this actually lasted less than a month for the economy to recover. But Keynes and other economists and politicians said basically, this was so bad, the next time this happens, we need to intervene, need to do deficit spending and all of that. They said that's this we need to do in the next time because this was so bad. And Mises pointed out at the time, no. What you're doing that caused this will cause a bigger crisis. And if you do what you suggest, then that crisis will be forever. And it turns out he was exactly right. But for some reason, Keynes managed to pull off the market trick that to this day, in universities, you will be taught, 1929 was a deflationary crash because of the gold standard. And then basically Franklin Delano Roosevelt solved it. No. The crash was because of fractional reserve. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt made sure that the US to this day has not recovered from the crash. They were able to push a lot of the bad consequences to other countries by winning World War II, but essentially the real income of that ordinary worker did never ever reach pre-1929 levels again. And the US debt also always only increased since then, and the dollar amount only increased. So if you look closely, even with two very profitable wars and being able to push a lot of the bad consequences off to other nations, they never recovered, exactly as Mises predicted.
Wow. It's really like the real terms wage has never got back to pre-1929 levels.
I mean, it's really tricky to compare these wages because you have to actually compare with the same goods. If you say, oh yeah, there's now a computer that wasn't there then, and it wouldn't have been possible, and the computer would have cost billions to make. But if you just look at a normal suit in the store, basically, the normal worker could afford it back then. Right now, it's hard for most normal workers to just buy a suit. Houses were like, a decent house was 2 or 3 average salaries in good neighborhoods. I mean, now even the bad ones, you don't get it for 2 or 3 average salaries. And the crazy thing is, I mean, even gold lost, because gold actually has inflation, and also there's always some kind of manipulation in the gold supply and in the gold market.
Yeah.
And the gold bugs always say, yeah, if you had like 10 kilos of gold, you could buy a house in 1910, and now you can also buy a house. But what they forget to tell you is that in 1910, with 10 gold bars, you got a really, really good house in a really good part of town. And now for the same 10 gold bars, you get a decent home in the suburbs of not top 10 city.
Yeah.
So even gold has a loss of purchasing power, but nothing compared to the dollar.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's I'd say theories. The US government has given themselves in legislation the ultimate right to intervene in any gold market in the world in order to protect national security, I think was the justification. I'll have to go back and check.
But Aguinaldos explained so well, they cannot compete against gold. And to be frank, that fiat system can only be ended by, as Hayek said, a sly way of bringing around a better currency, and then that better currency just has the same effect of competing against gold and destroys the fiat system. I think really over the next few decades, we'll see both a Bitcoin and a gold standard compete, is my personal prediction. And in the end, it will not be, will the dollar win against Bitcoin, but really will Bitcoin win against gold?
So I want to come back to that question, but just before we move on to that, because that I want to ask about a little bit more about the era of free banking, because so I walked on the street, in London, or I could go to New York or California, or somewhere, nice, Texas, like. No, they're all nice, I'm sure, in some ways, but. There's loads of different banks. It seems like there's a lot of competing entities here. Like what was different back then that is like the era of free banking? Because I could go and bank with Nationwide or Lloyd's or HSBC or some of the new internet banks, Starling or Monzo. Like what was different back then that makes it be described as the era of free banking?
We have to talk about what makes a good monetary token. Because you have to really separate. Money is a concept, is what I want to do. Is like, I want to drive a nail in a wall. Sends money, I wanna postpone a transaction in time, person, and place. And what many people forget is the separation between the tool and the concept. If I say, what makes a good hammer? You say this, the longer the handle, the more force it has, and the heavier and more rigid the head of the hammer is, that's the better hammer. And if you apply these standards to nail gun, you would say a nail gun is a terrible hammer. But still, the nail gun is much better at putting nails in the wall. And that's the thing also by many gold bugs, or even Austrian school-educated gold bugs don't get Bitcoin, because they say money needs to be a hard token. It needs to last long. And that way, basically, they confuse the hammer with putting the nail in the wall. And gold, while having been the best monetary technology for 5,000 years, has several downsides. I mean, money is usually, I've heard these usually 6 criteria that are put up. Scarcity, most important, vital one. As I said, the number needs to be constant, because value is always subjective and also not algorithmically processable, because your valuations are actually at any time relative. You cannot say, oh, my dog is worth double my cat and my children are worth 3 times the dog. That's not how your subjective valuations work. You would say, if the house burns, I will say first my kid, then my dog, and then my cat, maybe. Or the other way around. I feel like the cat more than the dog.
Or the dog more than the kid.
This means that value is not objectively measurable. The only thing you can measure is when 2 places in this hierarchy of valuations meet. So when we trade, when I say, hey, I give you 1,000,000 Satoshis and you give me a notebook or something, right? Nobody knows that
deal.
I value the notebook at 1,000,000 Satoshis and you value otherwise the 1,000,000 Satoshis as highly as your notebook. Because basically if I bargained harder, you maybe would have given it to me for 500,000. And if you bargained harder, maybe I would have given you 1.5 million Satoshis. Nobody knows that. But objectively verifiable, our valuations met at this point. And if you look at all the trade, there is basically a price where you can get a good of a certain quantity at a certain place. That just, with a lot of transactions, that just turns out this is the market value, which is objectively measurable, but has one issue. In which unit do you express it? Because the value is objective and also not ordinal, so not you cannot use normal algebra for it. You cannot multiply it, you cannot add it, you cannot subtract it. So if you measure something, there's 2 ways of doing it. Like first a kilo, you just have this heavy rock, and so that's 1 kilo, and you compare everything to that 1 rock. Or you say, more advanced, we have some natural constant, like light moves at this speed. And so we just say a second is a certain fraction of that or so. Or I think they actually use the time it takes for certain atoms to decay, right? These days.
Yeah.
Originally, they had also reference unit, but then they said, we need to have something more objective. The second way of measuring something that is to basically norm it on the whole. You say, okay, there's like humanity, and I'm one of 8 billion pieces, and the whole thing is humanity, and there's 8 billion pieces. And since valuation is subjective, the only thing you can do is norm to the whole thing. You can say, okay, this whole economy uses one money, and the number of monetary tokens obviously has to encapsulate or reflect like a mirror the value of all the transactions. That's easy to see if you have something like this. Is why I used the beer tent example in the book. Mm-hmm. If you have monetary tokens like in a beer tent that are ripped apart, invalidated after use, it's easy to see. If you have 1,000,000 liters of beer, 1 token is 1 liter, you need 1,000,000 tokens. That measures the beer. It's a bit difficult, more difficult in the actual economy where we reuse the token. Because then you have to take in mind that how often every token in the economy moves times their number must reflect all the goods being transacted and their prices. That's the Fischer equation, unfortunately not related. or maybe I can be glad because he also said a lot of nonsense, but that equation is one of the greatest insights in economics. So economics is next to impossible to study empirically. So you really have to look at what has to be logically true. What can I deduct from logic that has to be true? But also is always calls the a priori facts. And this equation is one such fact. There's no way that mathematics is correct and that equation is wrong. That it's true by definition. Still, both on the Austrian economic side, on the Keynesian side, and on the all these others like modern monetary theory, right? All of them often derogate that equation because it's very easy to misuse or deliberately misunderstand. Because basically, since it has two parameters on both sides, it's very easy to say, if I turn this one parameter on this side, this parameter on the other side has to move. And we just ignore that the other parameter also can change in accordance. And that's basically when they say that a constant money supply causes a deflationary crash, they basically ignore the monetary velocity, that each token can just circulate or more often in the economy. And actually, that's the actual process. So, because they say a growing economy needs more monetary tokens. That's exactly backwards. Because the growing economy means people are transacting or doing more transactions, the money moves faster. So each token actually mirrors the higher transaction volume. So a growing economy needs less monetary tokens, not more, actually.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.